After raising my stepdaughter as my own, she stood at her wedding and announced, "I want to thank my real mom for everything, not her." The guests laughed as my husband looked away. I was about to leave when the wedding planner rushed over and whispered, "Wait, they don't know the real surprise yet. I met Sarah when she was just 5 years old. Her father, Mark, and I had been dating for a few months, and the time had come for me to meet his daughter." I remember that day vividly. Sarah stood behind Mark's leg, peeking out at me with wide, curious eyes. Her mother, Laura, had left when Sarah was barely 2, and since then, it had been just the two of them. I could see the protective glint in Mark's eyes, a silent plea for me to be gentle with his little girl. Over the next few months, I made every effort to bond with Sarah. We'd spend afternoons at the park, bake cookies in the kitchen, and read her favorite stories before bedtime. Slowly but surely, she began to open up to me. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "I love you, Lily." My heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Mark and I got married when Sarah was 7. She was the flower girl at our wedding, tossing petals with a shy smile. From that day forward, I became her full-time mother figure. I was there for her first day of school, helped her with countless homework assignments, cheered at her soccer games, and comforted her after nightmares. Every milestone, every scraped knee, every triumph and failure, I was there. As Sarah grew into a young woman, our bond deepened. We had our share of disagreements, especially during her teenage years, but our love and respect for each other always brought us back together. When she got accepted into her dream college, we celebrated together, tears streaming down our faces. "I couldn't have done it without you, Lily," she said, hugging me tightly. Years flew by, and before I knew it, Sarah was engaged. She was radiant, and I was overjoyed for her. We spent months planning the wedding together, poring over details, laughing, and sometimes disagreeing, but always finding common ground. I felt honored when she asked me to help her pick out her wedding dress. As she stood before the mirror in a flowing white gown, I couldn't help but see the little girl who had once clung to her father's leg. "You look beautiful," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. The wedding day arrived, a sunny afternoon filled with joy and anticipation. Guests filled the pews of the old church, their chatter echoing off the high ceilings. I sat in the front row, my heart pounding with pride and a touch of nervousness. Mark sat beside me, his hand warm over mine. The ceremony was beautiful, a testament to the love Sarah and her fiancé shared. After the vows were exchanged and the newlyweds were introduced, we moved to the reception hall, a grand space adorned with twinkling lights and fragrant flowers. Laughter and music filled the air as guests enjoyed the festivities. Then came the moment for speeches. The best man spoke first, sharing humorous anecdotes that had everyone laughing. Next was Sarah. She stood gracefully, a vision in her wedding gown, holding a champagne flute. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. "I want to take a moment to express my gratitude," she began, her voice steady. "There are people in our lives who shape us, guide us, and make us who we are today. I want to thank my real mom for everything, not her." She gestured towards a woman seated a few tables away. My heart stopped. A murmur rippled through the crowd, followed by awkward laughter. Mark's grip on my hand tightened, but he didn't meet my eyes. I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My vision blurred, and a lump formed in my throat. The years of love, sacrifice, and devotion seemed to crumble in that instant. I couldn't sit there any longer. I rose from my seat, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and turned to leave. As I reached the exit, a gentle hand caught my arm. I turned to see the wedding planner, her eyes filled with urgency. "Wait," she whispered. "They don't know the real surprise yet." Confused and emotionally drained, I hesitated. She led me to a side door, away from the main hall. "Please, just trust me," she urged. I stood in the dimly lit corridor, my mind racing. Moments later, the doors to the hall opened, and the wedding planner beckoned me back inside. Reluctantly, I stepped in, my eyes adjusting to the light. The room had quieted, and Sarah stood in the center, holding a microphone. She looked directly at me, her eyes glistening with tears. "Lily," she began, her voice trembling. "I owe you an apology. My words earlier were thoughtless and hurtful. The truth is, you've been more of a mother to me than I could have ever hoped for. You've loved me, guided me, and stood by me through everything. I was caught up in the moment, and wanted to acknowledge Laura, but I did it in the worst way possible. I'm so sorry." Tears streamed down my face as I listened to her heartfelt words. The room was silent, the weight of the moment palpable. Sarah continued, "I have a surprise for you. It's something I've been planning for a while." She gestured towards a table at the side of the room, where a small box sat. Curious and still reeling from the emotional whirlwind, I approached the table. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside was a delicate necklace with a pendant in the shape of a heart. Engraved on it were the words, "Mom." I looked up at Sarah, my vision blurred by tears. She stepped forward and embraced me tightly. "You are my mom in every way that matters," she whispered. The room erupted in applause, but all I could focus on was the warmth of Sarah's embrace and the overwhelming love that flowed between us. From that day forward, our bond grew even stronger. We learned the importance of communication, understanding, and the depth of unconditional love. The wedding day, with all its highs and lows, became a testament to the complexities of family and the enduring power of love. I wish I could say things were perfect after that moment. That the necklace fixed it all, that her public apology erased the sting. But it didn't. Something shifted inside me that day. I had spent over 15 years pouring myself into raising Sarah. And with just one sentence in front of 100 people, she had pulled that rug out from under me. It wasn't just the words, it was how easily they came. Like I had been an afterthought in her life. Like I was the other woman, in a story I thought I had the lead role in. For the next few weeks, I kept my distance. I smiled when we talked, I answered her calls, but I felt something inside me pulling away. Mark noticed. One night, while we were brushing our teeth, he said, "She didn't mean it. You know that, right?" I spit out the toothpaste and stared at myself in the mirror. "She meant it enough to say it in front of everyone." She said sorry. "Yeah. Because the wedding planner told her to." He didn't say anything after that. He just looked at me, like he didn't recognize me anymore. The necklace sat in its box on my nightstand. I couldn't bring myself to wear it. It felt fake. Like wearing it would be pretending nothing happened. Like all the nights I stayed up with Sarah when she was sick, all the school meetings I went to, all the birthdays I planned, they didn't matter. 3 months after the wedding, Sarah called. She sounded off. "Can we meet? Just us?" We sat down at a small cafe near downtown Raleigh. She stirred her coffee, didn't drink it. "Lily," she said, finally looking up. "I'm pregnant." I smiled, out of habit more than joy. "That's wow. Congratulations." She nodded, but didn't smile. "There's more." She paused, then added, "It's not his." I blinked. "What?" "It's not Ben's baby." I leaned back in my chair. My hands tightened around the coffee cup. She kept talking, her voice low fast, like she was afraid of hearing herself say it. "It was a guy from work. It happened once. Before the wedding. I didn't think I'd get pregnant. I thought Ben doesn't know." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. "I don't know what to do," she said. "I haven't told anyone. You're the only one." And just like that, I was back in it. Her mess. Her secrets. Her decisions. I was the one she called when things blew up. I looked at her. This girl who I raised. Who rejected me in front of a crowd and then came running back when she needed someone. I wanted to yell. To tell her she made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But I didn't. I said, "Do you love Ben?" "Yes," she whispered. "Then you need to tell him. Soon." She nodded. "Will you come with me?" That question broke me a little more. After all that, she still wanted me there when her life unraveled. So I did. I went with her. Sat in the car while she walked into their apartment. Waited for what felt like hours. She came out shaking, crying. "He left." She choked. "He just packed a bag and left." She moved back in with us that night. Mark wasn't happy. She made her choices. He said, quieter than usual, "Why are we cleaning it up?" I didn't answer. I didn't know anymore. 2 weeks later, I came home from work and found Laura, Sarah's biological mother, sitting on my couch. She was laughing with Sarah like nothing had ever happened. She saw me and stood. "Lily," she said. "Good to see you." I stared at Sarah. "What is this?" I invited her. She said. I needed her. I thought you'd understand. Laura came around the couch, arms wide like we were about to hug. "We should all be a part of this baby's life," she said. I stepped back. "You don't get to disappear for 20 years and show up for the fun parts." Sarah jumped in. "She's trying. People change." I looked at Mark. He was watching, silent, jaw tight. I looked back at Sarah. "So am I just the babysitter now? The emergency contact until your real mom gets here?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Don't do this." "No," I said. "You already did." And I walked upstairs. That night, I could hear them laughing downstairs. The same kind of laugh Sarah used to have with me. I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. The next few days were quiet. Tense. Laura stayed at a hotel, But she was over every day, helping with baby stuff. Sarah acted like nothing was wrong. Like we hadn't gone through hell 3 months earlier. Like her betrayal hadn't left a permanent mark. One night, I opened my nightstand drawer and stared at the necklace again. Mom! Engraved in silver. And for the first time, I wondered if she gave it to me out of guilt, or pity. That thought didn't go away. Then came the twist I never saw coming. Mark and I were eating dinner. Just the two of us. He set down his fork and looked at me across the table. I think I need a break, he said. I froze. From what? From us. I felt my chest go hollow. You're leaving? I'm not saying forever. I feel like you're not here anymore. I wanted to scream. Because I'm tired, Mark. I'm tired of pretending everything's fine when it's not. I'm tired of being treated like a guest in my own house. He nodded slowly. I get that. But you've changed. I didn't have anything to say. He was right. I had. He moved into a rental 2 streets over. I didn't cry when he left. I just stood in the doorway and watched the taillights disappear. Now it's just me. In a house I built around a family that's falling apart. Sarah's still here. The baby's coming soon. Laura is here more and more. And sometimes, when I walk past the nursery we set up, I wonder if I'll even be part of this baby's life, or just a name in an old photo. About a week after Mark moved out, I started getting calls from numbers I didn't recognize. They didn't leave voicemails. Just rang a few times and hung up. At first I thought it was spam. Then one afternoon, I picked up out of frustration. The voice on the other end was male, hesitant. Is this Lily? He asked. Yeah. Who is this? A pause. Then, I'm sorry to bother you. My name's Kevin. I think we might be related. My stomach dropped. Related how? He cleared his throat. I'm Laura's son. I didn't say anything. Just stared at the floor like it would give me answers. I'd been looking for her for a while. She left when I was a kid. Found her name through some paperwork, saw she was connected to your daughter, Sarah. I didn't know she had another child. I just wanted to know, is she okay? I asked him to meet me the next day at a diner. He was polite, early 20s, nervous. Looked like he'd seen hard years. And he was telling the truth. He showed me old photos. A birth certificate. Letters he had written but never mailed. She left when I was 6, he said. Never came back. I felt sick. Because Sarah had grown up thinking Laura was just young, scared, confused. That she made one bad choice and regretted it for decades. But that wasn't the truth. She'd left more than once. She didn't just abandon Sarah. She had a history. I sat across from Kevin, unsure what to say. All I could think was, what is this woman doing back in our lives? Later that night I told Sarah. She didn't believe me at first. Thought Kevin was lying. Then I showed her the photos. The letters. The one Laura had written to a school, asking them to unenroll her son before she left town. Sarah's face changed. The kind of change you don't come back from. She confronted Laura the next morning. I wasn't there, but I heard about it through thin walls and slammed doors. Laura left in the middle of the night. Didn't say goodbye. Sarah cried the whole next day. I didn't say anything. I just sat beside her on the couch. Not because things were healed between us, but because sometimes pain is too loud to leave someone alone with. A few days later, Mark showed up at the door. He looked tired, like he hadn't been sleeping. I need to talk to you, he said. I let him in. He stood awkwardly in the foyer, then blurted. Laura called me. I blinked. Why? She said you were trying to turn Sarah against her. That you were controlling everything. That you were jealous. I almost laughed. But it wasn't funny. You believe her? I asked. He shook his head. No. I don't. But it scared me. How easily she lied. Like it was nothing. I didn't know what to say. Then he said. And there's more. Always is. I ran into Ben, he said, meaning Sarah's husband. At the gas station. I froze. He said he's been meeting with a lawyer. My heart dropped. Why? Mark's eyes were sad. He's not just divorcing Sarah. He's trying to get custody. He can't. The baby's not his. Mark nodded. Yeah. But he thinks he has a case. It didn't make sense. But then again, nothing had made sense for months. Later that night, I found Sarah in the nursery, just sitting in the rocking chair. She looked up at me. I don't know who I am anymore, she whispered. I didn't answer. I just sat down on the floor beside her. We sat there in silence. That's the thing they never tell you. Love doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it's messy, painful, full of sharp edges. Sometimes the people you give everything to are the same ones who break you. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. Because even though everything was falling apart, Sarah, the marriage, the lies, there was still a baby coming. And that baby didn't ask for any of this. The nursery was quiet, filled only with the soft creak of the rocking chair and the rhythmic tap of Sarah's foot against the floor. We hadn't spoken much in days. Since Laura's second exit, since the truth about Kevin came out, Sarah had turned inward. I let her be. I figured she needed space. But life doesn't pause just because you're hurting. 2 weeks later, the baby came. A little girl. They named her Hope. And in those first hours, when I held that tiny body in my arms, all the pain faded for a moment. She had Sarah's nose, and dark wisps of hair that reminded me of Mark when he was young. She was perfect. The hospital room was quiet, dim, filled with machines and soft murmurs. Sarah was asleep. I stood by the window with Hope cradled against my shoulder, humming without realizing it. Then the door opened. It was Ben. He didn't say a word at first. Just looked at the baby. "Do you want to hold her?" I asked gently. He nodded. I handed her over, careful. He looked down at her, then back at me. "She's not mine," he said, barely above a whisper. "I know. But I still love her. I loved the idea of her before she existed. I believe you." He sat down in the chair beside the bed, still staring at the baby. "But I don't trust Sarah anymore. And I can't raise a child with someone who lies like that." I sat on the edge of the bed, quiet. Ben looked at me again. "I'm not trying to hurt her. But I talked to a lawyer. There's a chance I can get shared custody. Because I was on the marriage certificate, signed the hospital papers. It's complicated." I didn't know what to say. That evening, Mark came by. He held Hope too. He even smiled. Then he asked me if we could talk outside. We stood by the vending machines in the hallway. "I miss home," he said. "I miss you." I swallowed hard. "But," he added, "you've changed." I looked at him. "So have you." We didn't hug. Didn't cry. Just stood there. Two people who had built a life, now watching it slowly crack. Then came the breaking point. 2 weeks later, Sarah decided to host a small gathering at the house. Just close friends and a few family members. She said she wanted Hope to be surrounded by love from the start. Mark came. Ben showed up too, unexpected. And somehow, so did Laura. I don't know who invited her. Sarah swore she didn't. Mark said it wasn't him. But there she was, in a sundress like she belonged there, holding a gift bag. People smiled politely. No one knew the full story. Kevin came too. I had invited him. I thought he deserved to meet his niece. He froze when he saw Laura. She froze when she saw him. The room fell silent. "You shouldn't be here," Kevin said, voice shaking. Laura's eyes darted around. "I don't know what he's doing here," she said louder. Sarah stood. "He's my brother. I never had another child," Laura snapped. "He's lying." Kevin pulled a folder from his backpack. "You signed this. You gave me up and vanished. Don't pretend." Mark stood up. "Maybe this isn't the time." "No," Kevin said. "I came to meet my sister. To see the baby. But I'm not gonna sit here while she lies again." Laura turned to Sarah. "You believe him over me?" And Sarah, holding Hope, whispered, "Yes." That was it. Laura turned and stormed out. Kevin sat down, head in his hands. Ben stood quietly, watching it all. Then he said it. "I'm going through with it. The custody case." Sarah looked up, stunned. "Why? You said you loved her." "I do. But not like this. Not with all of this," she cried. Loud, broken sobs that shook her whole body. Everyone left soon after. One by one. Quietly. Except for Mark. He stayed, cleaned up the dishes, took out the trash. We didn't speak. Just moved through the motions. Later, after Sarah had gone to bed with Hope, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table. "This house feels haunted," he said. "It is." He looked at me. "Do you think we can fix this?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't know. Weeks passed. Ben filed the paperwork. Laura disappeared again. Kevin stayed in town, helped when he could. Mark and I didn't reconcile. But we didn't fall apart either. We just paused. And Sarah? She's quiet now. Not the bubbly, headstrong girl I raised. She looks over her shoulder a lot. Sleeps less. Hugs Hope tightly, like she's trying to make up for something she can't name. As for me? Some days I feel like a mother. Other days I feel like a stranger in my own life. But I'm still here. I get up, I change diapers, I hum lullabies. I still love her. Both of them. But I'm learning to love myself too. Even if it means stepping back. Even if it means letting go. I don't know what comes next. But I'm no longer pretending. That, I think, is the start of something real.